we're going to talk about managing stored access policies for Azure Service Principals. Before we do, there's a bit of housekeeping stuff to get on with. Everyone said it, but it is true. Many thanks to the sponsors for sponsoring the event. I've spoken to most of them, and to be honest, they're not really in my they're not really related to the stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis. So I thought, I had a conversation with a couple of them, and I realised that maybe there's something that they could add value there. So even if you think, oh, they're not really kind of my thing, then it's just nice to have a chat and see what it is that they're about, really, because you never know, really. So a little bit about me. My name is Richie Lee, or just Richie. My role is I'm a senior DevOps engineer at a company called Red Kite Data Intelligence. They're based in London. They've got clients all around Europe. I'm English myself, born and bred in London. In terms of PowerShell community stuff, I was a contributor to DBA tools. I initially wrote the deployed DAC pack functions. I don't know if they've been updated since I wrote them. It was about 5 years ago since I wrote them. I don't know if too many changes have happened there, but if you've ever had a failed database deployment using DBA tools, then you know who to blame now. More recently, I've been contributing to Azure.Databricks.CI/CD.tools. It's basically just a way of source controlling the stuff that you have for Azure Databricks, like the notebooks and the jobs and the clusters, and a way of storing it and then pushing it out, and then you can pull it in as well. So it's quite a useful module there if you're using Azure Databricks. Quite frankly, it was nice to find that someone else had actually written something for it, as opposed to me having to start from scratch, which tends to be the case when it comes to using doing stuff in the data space. So my background is kind of in data. I've been a DBA, I've been a data engineer, excuse me, and I've been a software tester for like big data projects as well. So I know quite a bit around the data side of it. So working at a company like Red Kite, where it's all about the data, and having that DevOps knowledge is like quite an uncommon thing. So it's useful that I'm able to put my knowledge of both areas in at the same time. They grew during the pandemic era as well. I've only been working there for about 4 months, but it's a good place to work there. We've got lots of diversity at the senior management level, which I think is a really good thing. I have to apologise for my throat. I have not stopped talking all this conference, and it's finally giving up on me. So I think we could just do a show of hands on this one. Hands up those people whose English is their first language. Okay. Hands up. Obviously, everyone else is not their first language, right? Okay. Yeah. So the reason why I asked this question, I've presented at conferences before, but only in the UK. I've never come abroad, and I have been told by English people that I speak too fast. So I'm taking a very deliberate tone today to make sure that I don't lose people. I also have a tendency to use slang quite a lot, so I'm trying very hard not to use words that I think would confuse people otherwise. So bear with me whilst I try to keep it at a pace that I don't lose anyone. So again, I think we just do this one with a show of hands, really. So when I submitted the session, you had to put a one-liner, kind of like a summary, and I sort of saw this as like a learning objective. So I wrote as the one-liner, after this session, you will be able to understand how to automate access to storage accounts without having to recreate keys. So at this point in time, everyone in the room, if you could just give me a show of hands if you understand this kind of stuff now, or whether this is something. So okay, so I'm assuming a few of you know a little bit. Okay, so so within the DevOps space, really, for me, the most important thing, the thing I'm focusing the most on is security, because I find that people tend to choose that I just want something to work option, is like to get things going, and that's fine, but there needs to come a point where you come and tidy that kind of stuff up after you've sort of begun developing an application. So the problem here that I see is people run an ADF, or people run an Azure DevOps build agent, a pipeline or something else. And what they tend to use, they need to store a key securely, not in the code basically. And it's a question of like, how do we do that? So the first option that you got when accessing a storage account, you want to use a key securely, is to use Key Vault to store the value. I'm sure most of you are using Key Vault if you're storing secrets. Yep. I like Key Vault. It is obviously a really useful thing. It's not perfect though. Some of the issues I have around Key Vault is the fact that it's like yet another resource that you have to manage in Azure. So you have to create it. You have to manage the access to that. So there's the RBAC policies, and then there's the access control policies on top of that. And then it's a question of people accessing the Key Vault as well. And then there's, and so there's just a maintenance overhead with Key Vault really. So, it's a great tool, but there is a lot of maintenance there. So if we're going to use Key Vault, the next question is, what are we going to store in there? And when we're talking about storage accounts, the first option that people tend to go for is using the storage account access key. There's two keys. It's created as part of the storage account. And to put it, I think, in a language that everyone can understand, the storage account key is like this extremely powerful key that you can do absolutely anything on the storage account with. They're there for a reason. They're created as part of the storage account, so you do actually need to use them. But in the scenario of using an ADF pipeline or using an Azure DevOps pipeline, using the storage account key, it's just completely over the top. Not completely over the top. It's unnecessary. It's too powerful. It doesn't suit the need that we've got. So the next option that we've got is using shared access signature tokens, or SAS tokens. The term SAS token and SAS key is kind of used interchangeably in the documentation, so I might use that as well during this talk. When I say SAS token and SAS key, I mean the same thing. So a SAS token is based on like a least privilege kind of permissions model. So you'll create a SAS token, you'll determine what permissions that SAS token has got. There's like 8 permissions, like read, write, list, delete, update. I don't remember all of them, but then you set the permissions on that SAS token, and then you can store that in Key Vault, and then people can use that SAS token to access the container on the storage account. Nice things about it is the fact that it's got an expiry date on it. It's got a set list of permissions on it. It doesn't give you that massive access that the storage account key does. But then you've still got the question of how do you manage that SAS token? And what I mean by that is you've got 2 options to update it really. You can recycle it or you can refresh it. So when I say recycle, I mean just regenerate the SAS token, then go and update it in Key Vault. That's not an automated process. That's something you have to do manually. Not manually. That's something you can automate yourself, but then there's kind of like challenges around how you're going to do that in your estate, whether you rely on applications to do it or you have a central team to go and manage that refreshing or that recycling. Now, in Key Vault, there is a way to recycle the storage account keys, those really powerful ones, but there's no way to automate the SAS tokens. And I know someone who's writing a library in Python, a bit of a dirty word here, I suppose, to automate that process. And it's taken them a while to write that. And obviously, because when you're recycling that kind of thing, you want to be really confident that what you're doing is the right thing. And then you've got the option of refreshing it. So what I mean by this is you can set the expiry date or update the expiry date, kind of. The challenge here is that on a SAS token, you can't update the expiry date. So what people tend to do is they tend to set that expiry date to like 10 years in the future. So then they go and stick it in the Key Vault and then they have to worry about updating the value because the expiry date's just not going to expire. But then you're still in compromise basically, because if that SAS token gets compromised, if that gets exposed, then people are going to have 10 years to use that SAS token, and you can't revoke a SAS token remotely. There's no way you can do it. So the solution here is to use stored access policies. So I'll preface this by saying that I'm not a massive fan of demos. But I know they're keen on demos at this conference. So I have a short demo that I will go through, and then we can talk about what's happening here and why. Sorry? That's really bad, isn't it? Apologies. So there was a preference to use purple themes after a conversation yesterday, but obviously that looks pretty awful. Is that better? Better? Zoom. Okay, let's zoom in. Okay, let's get rid of that. And that comes down to, yeah. Okay, so this is fairly straightforward. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a resource group, create a storage account, create a container, and then I'm going to set an access policy on the container or against the storage account for the container, and then I'm going to generate a SAS token using that policy. So whilst this is running, I can talk a little bit more about this. So as I'm going through, I'm setting the context, I'm setting the AZ context to create subscription, the resource group, storage account being created. And then what I'm doing here is I'm grabbing the account keys. So these account keys are the really powerful storage account keys that I was talking about earlier. And the reason I'm grabbing those is because I need a context on the storage account in order to determine the permissions I need to do what I want to do. So I've created this storage context. I'm now creating this container. And then I'm creating this policy. So the stored access policy, instead of the expiry date, the start date existing on the SAS token, it's going to exist on this stored access policy. And this stored access policy is going to be viewable in the portal. So SAS tokens, once you create them, you don't get to see the value of them then. There's no list of them available. So creating this policy, setting it on the container, giving it a name, using the same storage context, so those shared access keys, storage account keys, setting the start date to like 5 minutes ago, and then I'm just adding 3 days. So this stored access policy has got 3 days to exist. And then these are the permissions assigned under the stored access policy. So typically you would, when you create a SAS token, you would set these things on the SAS token. But instead I'm setting them on this stored access policy. And then when I'm creating this SAS token, what I'm doing is I'm assigning it that policy there. And then you can get the SAS token at the end there if you really want to. So if we flick over to here and take a look. So this is the resource group that I created. That is the storage account. This is the container. And then if I look at, so these are the really powerful access keys that I was using. This is generating the shared access signature. So there's no list of them. This is just a new create one. And then the access policies, I always forget where they are. Apologies. Is it at the storage level? Let's go take a look. Oh, I've gone up too high. Nope. If I go one higher, I'm on the resource group. It might be on the container. policy, access policy. There we go. So this was the policy that I created. Thank you all. So you can see the expiry date is set 3 years. So the benefit of creating the stored access policy is the fact that I now am able to manage this on the container itself. So if I discover that the SAS token has been compromised, then I can revoke this here. So I can delete this or through automation or through the portal, so that then if people try to use that SAS token, then there's no stored access policy, so they won't have access. So it's quite a useful feature, really, in being able to make sure that people, it's like the next level up of security. And so I'll just comment all this out. So if you can imagine, after you've got that SAS key, you've added it to Key Vault, or you've shared it to that person, they're able to access it via Key Vault. And then in kind of, say, the pipeline that you're running, the ADF pipeline is your DevOps pipeline. I'm sure you could do it in a PowerShell as your function. I've not tested. This would be the process that you run again. So you would be getting the account keys from the storage account, creating that context again, using the account key, getting that policy from getting it from the container, setting a new expiry time, so adding 3 more days onto it, and then setting the stored access policy with the new expiry time. So if I run all of that, that should be done very quickly. Should be. So there we go. So now, if I look at this, if I refresh this, this will go from the 26th to the 29th. Yes. So the process there is, throughout your pipeline, you just, rather than having to manage, set a long expiry time or being managed external to the process, then you've got this this process that's just constantly running to update the values. So it's quite a simple, straightforward way of having quite a secure process of making sure that your keys are kind of, a short life cycle. You're able to manage them quite easily, internally within that process. But it's still not perfect, because you'll notice, if I go back to it, I had to grab these account keys, yeah? So I had to get these extremely powerful account keys in order to create them. Again, those account keys, you can access them this way, but you still need to have certain permissions on the storage account in order to be able to access them. I was able to access them because I was the owner, because I created it. I don't know whether contributor can actually access the stored access keys, but even so, using the stored access keys for lots of stuff is still not perfect, right? So I'm still having to use that. It would be preferable to use Azure Active Directory, and we shall come on to that in a second. And again, we still need to, if we're using those storage account keys, the recommendation from Microsoft is to refresh those stored access keys on a fairly regular basis, so that if they have been compromised and you're not aware of it, then you remove that access. The challenge there is that whenever you refresh those storage access keys, anything that's been created using those storage access keys, like for example the policy and the SAS token, they're going to be invalid. So then you'll need to have a process of updating the stored access policies and the SAS token. So that's kind of like, that's a challenge if you've got this continuous process, but then you can have something external managing all the other, managing the actual keys themselves and how to refresh them. So there's like an admin overhead there. And I don't like that kind of thing. I always find that it's, it can get messy and it can take a long time and things can go wrong. It creates problems, I think. So it's a better solution than using, using a stored access policy and a SAS token is better than using the stored access key. It's better than using creating a SAS token with like a really long life cycle and just passing it off to someone. It's still pretty secure. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's from like a DevOps and maintenance point of view. I think there is like a few problems there that I think that need addressing. So what you can do is to use a managed identity to create a user-delegated SAS key. So you've got storage access keys, SAS tokens, stored access policies, and finally user-delegated SAS tokens. So the idea here is that you use authentication from Azure Active Directory to go and create this SAS token. So because Azure Active Directory is trusted by Azure, anything that uses user delegation to create that key, it means it can trust using that key. You can't create stored access policies using that authentication process. It's not in place. It would be very simple if it was. This talk would finish 24 minutes early, basically. But so this is the kind of like the next level. So the idea here is to use an identity that exists in Azure Active Directory to go and create a user-delegated SAS key, and then we can share that out. So a quick show of hands. Who knows about managed identities? Okay, that's good to see. So we'll talk about kind of the concept around managed identities and how it fits into Azure Active Directory, and then we'll show how we can use managed identity to create that key. So in Azure Active Directory, there's 3 identity types. You've got users, groups, security groups in this case, and enterprise applications. So users, we've all got a user login. Groups, you're added to a security group, and then that can be used in Azure. And then enterprise application is basically an app that exists in the cloud in Azure Active Directory that we can trust so that we can use that. So when you create an app registration, you also create an enterprise application, and everyone uses the term service principal, which is a little bit confusing because it's sort of three things that are actually 2 things that are actually 1 thing, and it's a little bit confusing. So when you talk about a service principal, most people are talking about the app registration. The app registration has the secrets and the certificates created on it. So this is the authentication part of Azure. So so we can use the secrets in order to log in using the service principal. And then you've got the enterprise application, which is what we assign roles to in Azure, the RBAC roles. So it's important to note that there are 2 things there that are essentially the same thing. They have unique IDs to them, the enterprise application and the app registration. They're both named identically. They have separate GUIDs for their ID, but they have a foreign key between them, which is a shared GUID. So sometimes you'll see that you'll be looking for an enterprise application and because of the GUID, but it's actually the GUID of the app registration. So this separation is how Azure is able to use Active Directory as that trusted identity store. Why do we use service principals? I look around the room and I see some people are probably old enough to remember the good old days of on-prem. You used to have service accounts created in Azure Active Directory, usually sort of, SVC _ blah, blah. And then you would still use Active Directory as the trusted identity store for this service account to go and run, I don't know, to go and start SQL Server or run reporting services or something like that. So service principals essentially replace that in the cloud for us. And if you use service principals, you'll know that there is that admin overhead. Again, it's the same old story with secrets. There's an administrative overhead with storing secrets. When you create a service principal, you're exposing sensitive info like a password or something like that. And I worked at a place very recently, I was a consultant there, where because I was a consultant, I didn't have permissions to create or to request keys being updated on the service principal. So I'd have to ask my line manager. And the process was, I'd ask my line manager, he'd raise a ticket, it would get an email would be sent to him with the new password, and then he would forward that email to me. So some places are still really behind the times on, proper secret management. And so when you expose secrets, you're exposing a risk there. And anyway, even if you do have secrets, they're still secure. And that's not entirely true. Because again, a little bit of Python at a PowerShell conference is controversial. This is an Azure Databricks notebook. I'm running some Python here. So dbutil-secrets.get. The scope is Bob. That is the name of a Azure Key Vault. So it's Azure Key Vault backed secrets. And the name of the key is Bob. And then for each value in X, I'm printing out there, and I'm doing the same for the second one. So it's quite easy to get the values of secrets if you know how. And these are Azure Key Vault backed ones. And it's not just happening in Azure Databricks with Python. You can do it in Azure DevOps with PowerShell as well. So that's an Azure Key Vault backed secret that exists in Azure DevOps, and I'm just able to go and print out the value there. This is really useful if you've ever lost the value of a secret, but it still just shows that secrets can be exposed really easily. So really things are only secure as their weakest point. So we come on to managed identities. Managed identities are basically machine accounts. For those of you who know what machine accounts are, managed identities are basically the same, identically the same as service principals. And enabling them is quite simple. For ADF, you do absolutely nothing. When an ADF is created, a managed identity is created in the enterprise applications for Azure Active Directory. And for all other resources, you can automate it using any one of those tools. You can also use the portal. I mean, for a VM, for example, you just go to managed identities and just flick an on button, and it's immediately created and enabled for you. There's nothing else. It's a very simple thing to go and set up. So if you look at the top there, there's two screenshots here. So the top screenshot is of an ADF, and we're looking at enterprise applications here. And you see the application ID there is the shared foreign key between an app registration and an enterprise application. So we grab that foreign key from the enterprise app, and we put it in the app registration, and you'll see that nothing exists. So that whole identity part where you go and create secrets doesn't exist anymore. That is basically a certificate exists on the actual resource in Azure, so it knows that that is a trusted resource. You don't need to manage secrets or anything like that anymore, which is, again, it's just really useful. I don't have a demo for this. I do have some code, which I will share, but it's going to show you the difference between the first process and the second process. So again, we're setting the subscriptions and some of the variables. We're getting the context for the subscription ID, creating a resource group, creating a storage account. So this time when we're getting the context, instead of having to go here and get the account keys before I set that context, what I'm doing here is I'm just using the connected account. So if I was running this in an ADF pipeline, it would be using the managed identity of the ADF pipeline. If I was running this on DevOps, use the managed identity of the VM. I'm sure it's the same with Azure Functions, so it's just making use of that managed identity. Creating a container with the managed identity context. And then at this point, that's it. So you create a container, there's no access to it, there's no access keys that exist for it. So what you can do, or what you do rather, is you connect to management.azure.com to get a token. This is an OAuth token. So then you use this OAuth token when you go and create a SAS token. So that's the authorization of there. So I'm not having to use any storage access key. So this token is created. I don't know what the expiry time is on it. Usually with this type of thing from AAD, it's about an hour. And then what I'm doing here is this is a JSON object, obviously. What I'm saying is I want on this container, specifically this container, I want these permissions. I only want to use HTTPS, so only HTTPS connections can use this SAS key, and then I want the expiry date of it to be, or expiry time of it to be only 3 minutes. And then when I invoke that web request, I'm setting those parameters in the body. I'm getting the response, and then I'm getting the shared access, the SAS key basically back. So in my pipeline, in my Azure DevOps pipeline or ADF pipeline, I would just have to have this line of this bit of code here to go and get the SAS key that I need to go and access the storage account. So it's a really useful feature. What that essentially means is that I have removed the need for using Key Vault, basically. So there's no concern around having to use the stored access keys. There's no concern around having to refresh the values of those SAS keys. There's no concern around the stored access policies. There's no concern around the compromise, because the SAS token is going to exist only for the lifetime that I need it to exist for the pipeline to run. And, you know, if it's a 5-hour pipeline in ADF, that's fine. You know, you set it to 8 hours, and then when it ends, it would eventually disappear. So being able to remove Key Vault, you know, also means that no need for me to go and create a Key Vault and manage the access to that. And for me, from like a DevOps perspective, that's kind of sort of the best that you could possibly get, really. You know, Microsoft's done a good job in creating this, and being able to leverage this is really useful, because you don't want to have to come back and maintain, you know, this sort of access. You just want something to run, and then you can move on from it. And when you do delete a managed identity, when you delete a resource that has a managed identity, the managed identity is deleted as well. So there's no need to go and worry about revoking access. The fact that if you're creating the SAS token within the pipeline itself, and that pipeline disappears, then you know, you don't have to worry about revoking access at any point there. Okay. Feel free to go online at menti.com and answer this question if you agree with this statement, or if you now understand how to access storage accounts without having to recreate keys. That's pretty much all I've got. So are there any questions? I've done a good job then. All right, so bonus content. So I spoke about the need that now that I've been able to remove the Key Vault from the kind of like the application setup here. If I wanted to, I could still use a Key Vault. A user-delegated SAS token can be used by anyone. So it's not just one token, one managed identity. So I can go and replace all the SAS keys that I'm using with user-delegated ones, and there's that trusted user delegation there. You know, the benefit there is the fact that you know, the whole refresh process can be run quite easily through any number of pipelines. Really, it doesn't have to just be Azure DevOps or ADF. And the life cycle of a SAS token or user delegated SAS token, you can set the expiry date to a max of 7 days. So you know, if you're going to use it and if you're going to share it, you basically are forced to have to figure out how to go and refresh the expiry date on that. So if you're not using user delegated SAS tokens, I'd highly recommend using them in order to access storage accounts, because they are they're extremely useful. So if no one has any questions, I would just say thank you very much for coming to my talk.